Brother Mooney's gone off the deep end. Let me take you back about 20 years ago. I had a little radio broadcast in Muskegon, Michigan. I'd been on the air with a little program called Bread of Life. Still have it. I think I've been on the air every day for the last 30 years. And I got a call from a man. His name was Carl Agerstrand. And he called me and he said, do you believe what you really preach on the radio? And I said, yes, sir, I really do. He said, well, good, I want to talk to you then. He said, would you meet me at a little restaurant? He called it Cherokee Restaurant on Sherman Boulevard. He said, do you like coffee? And I said, yes. He said, good, we'll meet there 8 o'clock in the morning. Is that all right with you for coffee? I said, yeah, that'll be fine. And so I got on the telephone. I was just so alarmed. I called Sister Mooney. I ran by the church. I started praying, and I thought, oh, I need to go see this man, but I didn't know exactly who he was. And so I called Sister Jean. I don't see her here, but she worked for me at the library at that time, and she did a lot of research work for me. And I called her, and I said, Jean, you got to help me find out who this Carl Lagerstrand is. I've got a meeting with him. I don't know who he is. About 2 hours later, she called back. She said, whoa, do you know who Carl Lagerstrand is? I said, Jean, maybe you missed something here. I called you. She said, Brother Mooney, you're not going to believe this. Said he is considered among the 7 top theologians in the world. He's represented the Lutheran Church at the World Council of Churches for 25 years. They meet every 4 years in Geneva, Switzerland. Said, he is really a big-time guy. I began to pray. I said, God, you've got to help me. I got my Bible out and started really studying the Godhead. A little late maybe, but I was... You know, this guy was in Time magazine, one of the top. I thought, and something just seemed to speak to me and said, you know, it's too late. Sometimes you just got to go just as you are without one plea. 8 o'clock in the morning, I went down to the little Cherokee restaurant, and one of the most handsome men that I'd ever met in my life, 6'4" or 5", pure white hair, 80 years old. He had a presence, an aura about him. He already had my coffee poured, and I sat down at seat number 1. I ate there often. It was my favorite booth, and I sat down there, booth number 1, and I began to just reach for my coffee. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask me about my family, my kids. He just started hitting me on my hand like this. He just started hitting me like this on my finger, and he said, so, you believe that message, that about Jesus' name? You believe that? I said, yes, sir, I really believe that. He said, good. He said, do you know who I am? Just hitting me on my finger like. I said, yes, sir, I do. I know that you're Dr. Carl Lagerstrand, and I know that you represented the Lutheran Church for 25 years at the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland. Time magazine said you're one of the 7 top theologians in the world. He said, you did your homework. He said, now listen to me, because what I'm going to say to you, I'm saying to you because I feel really led to talk to you. When I heard you on the radio, something inside of me said, you got to go talk to that young man. You got to tell him what you know. He's hitting me. He just keeps tapping me. I can still feel it today. Listen to me. In the fear of God, I realize that I'm standing on a pulpit. I realize that this is a conference of ministers and precious saints of God. I'm going to tell this to you exactly as it happened, as best I can recall it word for word. He said to me, he said, you know, every time we meet in Geneva, Switzerland, it doesn't matter if it's maybe in some committee meeting, maybe it's in some public meeting, somewhere, but every time we meet, somebody asks the question, what are we going to do with the oneness people? Said they want to know what we're going to do with you guys. He said, you know, it's interesting, you don't fit in anywhere. He said, you're pre-Nicene. And he asked me again, said, do you really believe that? And I said, yes, I do. He said, well, let me tell you something. I believe you're right. He said, of all the people on the face of the earth, he said, you have the most correct interpretation of pre-Nicene Christianity. He said, hang on to it. He said, now I want to ask you something else, young man. And he's pressing me, he's pressing me. He said, I want you to think about this. He said, are you willing to die for this? I rocked back in my booth number 1, Cherokee Restaurant, Sherman Boulevard. I said, now, Dr. Agerstrand, that is a very interesting question. He looked at me. He waited. He didn't say anything. There was tension between us. And finally, I leaned forward again, put my hand across the table, touched his hand now that was on the table, and I said, "Sir, I do believe that I can say that I am willing to die for this message." He said, "Good. You may have to." He said, "What you oneness people don't realize," as we moved on in the conversation, it wasn't his very next statement, but he said, as we moved on, he said, "What you don't realize is how serious this business of religion really is, how it is intertwined with the dynamics of politics, how it all just kind of works together. It's all meshed together. This is serious stuff." That's the message somehow we got to get across to each other. This is serious. How you believe, where you stand, how you think. Oh, I wish somebody had helped me just a little bit. I know I got to move on quickly here. Your fate is at stake. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not interested in some kind of superficial isolation. Can I get a witness? You don't have to worry about isolating yourself. If you preach the truth, the message itself will isolate you eventually. I don't have time to explore this because I want to move quickly. But I do believe with all of my heart that our method, shall we say, or our attitude of evangelism needs to be the same as Aquila and Priscilla. I appreciated Brother Marler exploring this in his new book about doctrine, how that we need to have a sweetness of attitude in terms of our style and our approach. Acts chapter 18, verse number 26, "And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly." What a tremendous gift they gave to Apollos. What did they do? They took him gently, waiting till he finished. They took him with them, giving him hospitality. They expounded or declared or exposed to them the truth. You know what that tells you? This was a moment of confrontation. They loved him, they were good, they were kind, they were hospitable, but they nevertheless were unafraid of confrontation. If you're going to win your brothers, your sisters, your mothers, your fathers, you cannot be afraid of confrontation. Clap your hands on that point. And notice what else. They expanded to him the way more perfectly.